Okay, everyone. I trust everyone can hear us, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our second meeting in history utilizing Zoom, and I welcome everyone. I do remind everyone on board here in the Township of Douro-Dummer that we are being recorded, and this is live on YouTube for the world to see, and please remember that throughout our meetings. Now, we will be holding the meeting just the way we do our normal council meeting, except we're not in our council chambers. So we will do the best we can to adhere to our normal rules, but it seems nothing is normal these days. Okay, I would like to remind members of council that we will be calling for the votes as we usually do. And if you would raise your hand, I will be saying all those in favor. If you would raise your hand and wave it so we can clearly see it. And then I will attempt to say all those against, and if you would put your hand up if that is the case. So that's how we will do that. So I'd like now to call the roll. So please raise your hand when I call your name, and we can introduce you to everyone. First of all, Deputy Mayor Carl Moher, Councillor Tom Watt, Councillor Sheila Landsman, and Councillor Heather Watson. Good, we are all here and we all waved our hands, and welcome everyone. Also on board with us is our temporary CAO, Martina Chait. Martina?
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. And Crystal McMillan is our clerk. Good to have you here. And also our treasurer, Darlene Heffernan. Darlene is here in name only by the look of it. And our staff are here. You might not see their pictures, but they are on standby should we need them. Also joining us today is Tammy Carruthers and her staff from WSCS Consulting. And they are going to present, that's the only reason for the meeting today at 4 o'clock, the interim report on the Township Service Delivery and Organizational Review that has been going on for some time, somewhat hampered by COVID-19, but I know they've done their best to keep that job going. So I'm going to ask Tammy if you will introduce your staff, Tammy, who are here today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. So on the phone, we have Kelly Stilling, who is our IT consultant. We've got Angela Gravel, who is our clerks and planning expert, and Jawad Kassab, as well as John Scorbahash there as well. I'm not 100% sure he was going to join us. Unfortunately, Dave Anderson sends his regrets. I have to present on his behalf. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Tammy. So with all of council in attendance, I will now formally call our meeting to order, and I will ask if there is any pecuniary interest with any of the matters we're dealing with. Would you wave your hand and speak up if that is the case? Okay. Adoption of the agenda. This is a special meeting here on this 5th day of May. Could I have a motion, please? From Deputy Mayor Moher, second by Councillor Landsman. All in favor? All against? That motion is approved. Okay, as I said, the only reason we're here today is to get the update from Tammy and staff of WSCS. And Tammy, I'm going to turn things over to you and we'll have our first look at all the work you've been doing.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen, so please let me know if you can see that screen. I'm going to start the PowerPoint from the beginning, so hopefully you see a PowerPoint that says Service Delivery Review Internal Report. Yep. Everybody see that? Perfect. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. So as your worship indicated, we're here to give you an update on the service delivery review, and very important to note that this is just an interim report primarily focused on the current state assessment findings to date. Although Of course, we have our COVID situation. We have been working in the background. We will talk a little bit about the status quickly during this time as well. So what we're going to present today is really just a very quick overview of the methodology and the status of the current report. We will talk a little bit about our benchmarks that we've been utilizing in this review, and then we're going to jump into our preliminary findings and preliminary opportunities. As I said, it is interim, so we certainly want to hear from you as the client to any challenges. So in terms of the service delivery review objectives, within the review itself, we were charged with looking at all of your services and identifying those that are mandatory and discretionary, identify areas where you potentially could find identify areas of efficiency, effectiveness, synergies between departments, and analyze the viability of your services in their current state. And of course, look at any possible alternatives to service delivery models. Linking to your strat plan from 2018, it really does focus or align with certainly around your effective administration and some of the other areas. So once we're completely finished the review, then of course we'll have a set of recommendations following that. The service delivery review is really focusing on the 10 crucial questions, which we're still working through, but really after this point, we'll start to identify areas where we need to increase some of the data that we need to finalize some of the assessment of these 10 crucial questions. Which were, of course, identified at the very beginning of the service review. And looking at the types of businesses, what are expectations from citizens, to what degree the municipality is meeting those expectations and managing the demand for service, and looking at things from the long-term perspective as well. Are there some areas where benefits could be increased? Could services be delivered in a more efficient manner? And looking at things from the long term. So long term in terms of balancing today's requirement with tomorrow. So we are right smack dab in the middle of our approach. So first started off with gathering information, and we were lucky that we were able to do your SWOT analysis before the COVID situation occurred. So, and we've continued on the consultations, and we've gone through the benchmarking exercise. We will continue to do so as we analyze the current state. And then, so we're in the middle part where we're evaluating your current as-is services. Business processes are their next step. Of course, with the COVID situation, that's going to be, we're going to have to take a little different approach than we normally would. We'll have to do it to some degree remotely. We do have some technology to be able to do that. So we're in the interim. I would say we're just shy of the interim. We would have liked to have had some more of the business processes analyzed. But we certainly have a good understanding of the services you're providing. So that's where we're at. And then the next stage is going to be the organizational part of the review, and then develop a draft final recommendations, which of course will come back to committee and council. So we are still on track to finish in June as far as we're concerned. We have done 2 surveys with council and staff as well. So really what we're trying to do with the entire service delivery review is to improve services and outcomes, improve processes, look at increased opportunities for revenues, and of course looking at what is the township going to need in the future. So how can we set you up for long-term success? So first thing we did after, well, I shouldn't say the first thing, but since we were on site, we've been looking at other municipalities as potential benchmarks. And all benchmarks are really intended to do is to give you a sense of, are there some best practices perhaps that other municipalities are undertaking, but also just to give you a sense of maybe there's some comparators in terms of efficiencies, types of services the other municipalities are providing. So we looked at one key element that we always look at, of course, is property taxes. And comparing over since 2009, the municipality against the provincial average. Now, you will note that we use per household taxes as opposed to per assessment, because that allows you to sort of minimize the impact of assessment values. So as a household, being able to access services. So you'll notice that the township, as you said in your SWOT, you are significantly below average and below the provincial average in 2018. And this all comes from the financial information returns. In 2018, the provincial average was $5,000 a household, and clearly Douro-Dummer is much less than that. And so the red represents the upper tier, the blue represents the township. So definitely a lower than average. We looked at a variety of benchmarks in terms of population, similar size to the township. So when we're looking at services and costs and types of services, it allows us to look at some possible opportunities. So all of you'll see that the populations that we chose are all in between this 6,700 to 7,000 kind of range. A couple of these are WSCS clients, so we have some specific information around what they provide. And population density is also very important, particularly when you're looking at services such as public works delivery. So we like to look at population density that's similar. So when we look at lower tier taxes per household on its own, so just that lower tier piece for 2018, you'll see that Douro is below the average, and the average for the provincial as well as the benchmarks that we provided. So again, really just confirming what you believed in terms of some of your strengths. Similarly with operating costs on a per household basis, again, Douro-Dummer is certainly below the benchmark average as well as the provincial average. So when we looked at non-tax revenues, this is probably the area where I see that the township has some opportunities to look at how other municipalities are raising taxes through raising revenues, through non-tax revenue. In this case, Douro-Dummer is below average. And some of them, and I've adjusted this for municipalities that have water and sewer. So this does not include water and sewer fees, just in case you're wondering. So if you look at, for example, say Whitewater region, probably the area that they've seen an increase in non-tax revenues is around arena advertising. They've done some great stuff around that. So there are some areas where I think that Douro-Dummer could definitely benefit from looking at non-tax revenues. The interesting thing that I thought was also even on the operating grants, Douro is lower than a lot of your benchmarks. In terms of when we look at sort of stability, sustainability, we looked at reserves per household, and certainly you're below the provincial average. The provincial average is quite high. The average of the benchmarks is not quite as high. It's about $1,900. So again, your reserves are not as high as some of your benchmarks, which of course is an indicator of sustainability. However, you also had very low debt per household. So there's some potential for you to have some room to build some of those reserves. So sort of a mixed results there. Some good news and some different news. In terms of expenses by function, so this is really your general government, your protective services, so fire, etc. Again, you're lower than average, obviously, in total. And actually, the interesting one to highlight here is that on the recreation side, you're actually, sort of in the middle of the pack. I know there was some concerns around the recreation facilities. And so in actual fact, in some cases on a per household basis, you're actually less than the benchmarks. In terms of the workforce, one thing to note here is this is a workforce per 1,000 population. You do have a higher than proportion of part-time staff, and that's that we've highlighted in a couple of the findings, and maybe an area where there's some opportunities there. Of course, some of them have very large. Again, it depends on their operating model, but you will see that you're really the second in terms of part-time, which has some impacts, I think, on services. However, in terms of total costs as a percentage, compensation, you're right on the average for the benchmarks. You're actually below provincial average. So on average, the province across the province, salary and wages and compensation is 43%. You're at 30%, and actually all the benchmarks are ranging in that area. So you're basically on par, and some of them are a little bit less. You'll notice that if you look at say Central Huron or Augusta, they're kind of relying a little more on contracted services, but it gives you a sense that your compensation costs are in line with the benchmarks. The next couple are kind of interesting benchmarks that we like to use around asset management and performance. Asset sustainability ratio. This one is really about how much are you investing in your tangible capital assets and your capital additions. And so the target in terms of being a benchmark for the province is 90%. And the target being that your capital additions as a percentage of your amortization expense, which recognizes the utilization of assets every year. And so how much are you sort of renewing that? So Douro is below the benchmark as well as the provincial average. So in that area where asset renewal could be an area for concern there. In terms of asset consumption as well, you're only slightly below the target of 50%. And what that represents is the closing amortization over the total cost of your historical cost of your tangible capital assets. And basically that's showing you to what degree your assets are aging, which actually is shown again in the next couple, whereby we look at what's the net book value of your tangible capital assets per household. Again, are smaller than the average. The average in the benchmarks about 9,500, and the province is at 27,000. So in terms of investing in assets, that gives you an idea that your assets are aging, and that's an area for you to be looking at in the future for sure. Similarly, even on capital expenses per household, what I did here was I looked at an average over 10 years. And the average for the benchmarks was about $846 per household, and Douro-Dummer was at almost half that. So an area to be looking at for sure. So those are really the benchmarks. When we do the final report, we will use the benchmarks in individual services to look at different opportunities. For example, number of facilities and obviously roads, etc. So the benchmarks do give us a little bit of interesting results to contemplate. So the next part we're going to talk about is some of the findings and the opportunities. And I'm just going to caution that these are preliminary findings based on what we've seen to date. I'm in terms of service provision. Not as much in terms of processes, as we mentioned, because we're going to do an additional work around processes and some initial opportunities that we see that the municipality could contemplate pretty rapidly, really. First and foremost, we did a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats sessions with both council and staff, and the details will be in the report, but I wanted to highlight that in general, staff and council were united on a variety of things. In terms of the strengths of the organization and the municipality. Certainly low taxes and debt, which we've demonstrated with some of those benchmarks. Dedicated staff, your environment in terms of rural natural resources, sense of community, and of course your location and proximity to Peterborough and the GTA is definitely a strength for the municipality. Some of the weaknesses, again, were common processes and technologies. Some of them have not been changed in several years. Technology in terms of being able to just utilize what you have and potentially leverage what's out there. Communications internally and externally, planning. And when I say that, this is a variety types of planning, long-term planning, and of course, lack of funding around infrastructure, et cetera. And of course, aging infrastructure is just going to add to that weakness. So in terms of threats, of course, we have our pandemic that was the one that was actually, it was added at the very end of our SWOT. And unfortunately, we've seen it come to fruition, and it has certainly turned into a threat. So how we all come out of this and looking at risk management, I think is important. Threats around political change, whether it be at a variety of levels of of government, both in Canada and elsewhere. Staffing turnovers, shortages, a variety of things, funding, new residents coming into the municipality with expectations, and cybersecurity. Lots of opportunities, though, that were identified, and I think we've highlighted some of them in these findings. Certainly around shared services, there's a general desire to share some services with other municipalities, Eastern Ontario Regional Network, in terms of broadband opportunities. Communication strategy, and certainly I know you're planning to update your website this year, and I think that's a good timing to be able to do that. Obviously, technology provides us with all kinds of opportunities. Looking at master planning, so fire master plans, you do have a recreation master plan that allow you to do some longer term planning. The community centers, and really looking at how you could exploit those opportunities and growth as the municipality being outside the GTA, that's definitely an opportunity that we're going to see come forward. So as I mentioned, we did both a council survey on a variety of areas to get a sense of where council sees the organization and the municipality as a whole. And then, of course, we did a staff one as well. I just want to highlight a couple of things in terms of the results there. Overall, roads and infrastructure and health and safety were identified pretty unanimously as being highest priority and long-term investments. There was pretty well unanimous support around community engagement improvements, shared services, sort of a clearer picture of where the township should go. There was also pretty much unanimous agreement that processes need to be streamlined, particularly in the short term, so that you can do some of those long-term plans. And in terms of training, looking at some ways to provide council with expanded training, roles, responsibilities, and different types of procedures, and maybe as well even on the orientation, and that could really build your long-term plans. The top 10 things that came out of that survey as far as council's opportunities for improvement around planning, the planning processes, asset management, obviously staff and having them healthy, better management of the community centers and utilization, shared services, communications and outreach to the community as well as internally, enhanced training and succession planning. Roads, of course, roads was a common thread throughout all of our surveys, better, more efficient processes and better utilization of technology. So pretty wide range opportunities there. In terms of the staff survey, we've split this up into two categories here around how the people feel about working for the township and how change ready they are. Certainly, in general, people are fairly happy about working at the township. We did get a 96% response rate of the people who were provided surveys. I will say that that's not every staff. So for example, the volunteers weren't included in that at this point. So, and 30% had more than 10 years of service that were surveyed. So generally, people seem like they've been listened to. So 86% saying that management's acted upon their recommendations. This is probably not surprising in some areas, but that 41% were actually not satisfied with compensation. But also, I think probably more interesting was around the performance management approach. So you'll see here in the bottom right, some recommendations around how performance management could be better implemented at the township, including a more formalized framework, looking obviously at the neighbors' pay grids, that kind of thing, recognition programs, and flexible work and training. Couple of things here to note too was around technology, the level of comfort with technology. There's about 30% of the staff that don't feel comfortable with the level of technology, or they don't have the technology at their fingertips. And in terms of basically align that with around change, 41% actually were worried that things wouldn't change, which I thought was actually, that's a high number from what I've seen in other surveys. So, and then in terms of safety, some certainly having some concerns around safety. So you'll see the top training needs start at software, health and safety, facilities, etc. So I'll leave that with you, but basically things are consistent. In terms of communication, there's also some areas where the municipality could improve, and there are, I've put a couple of quotes in there, but communication internally certainly sounds like it could be improved, and that staff really want to be informed. They are, you know, most are, or half of them feel that there are some opportunities for improvement. A lot of them are the same, really, that council identified in terms of improved processes. So in terms of the findings, I'm going to start with the nice stuff, the good stuff, because there's lots of good stuff to report on. You know, staff and council are definitely passionate about the community. There's no question, and staff generally like working for the township. We don't see that everywhere, I will tell you. So that's good. Partnerships you already have, you can build on, and you have a lot of software and systems, but on the corollary, they're really underutilized, not integrated. So even though you have them, they haven't been implemented or they haven't been integrated, and so they're not getting the you're not getting the best bang for your buck around that. You don't have enough resources to make good decisions. Even the analysis I did in doing this review showed me that. Some of the organizational structure, which of course is the next piece, could be, and accountabilities likely need to be better defined. And we talked about long-term planning. So looking longer term when undertaking plans. And this is probably the telling tale. Now this is as of 2018, but your assets are aging. I'm sure you know that. But the interesting thing is your average remaining life of your assets is 7 years, and some of them less than that in terms of sort of buildings is at 9. So some challenges ahead on the infrastructure side of things. So the township really is in a position to now to try to put those frameworks in place to do that. So key findings, and this is across all services, really. Some of them are specific. Some key findings is certainly around the procedural bylaw, we believe needs to be some updating, and I think that was identified even from the SWOT, and asset management plan needs to be updated. Your last roads needs study was in 2017. That's going to be out of date for the regulation, which is 2021 assets have to be in the asset management plan, and the data has to be at least less than 2 years old. So that's going to need some update. Overarching, there's really no IT strategy. So a lot of times technology has been purchased without looking at the long-term requirements. And that has resulted in those not being integrated and duplication of effort because of that. So certainly more training around IT will help that, but really that integration and that underutilization is important. And looking at mobile. So a lot of your staff obviously are in the field. And so if you're going to improve processes, they need to have access to some of those work management opportunities and mobile opportunities. So fairly reactive in terms of work planning. Of course, your strategic plan was last 2018. So how can you get to a long-term plan? Look at a different sort of staff council approach and getting council to really concentrate on that strategic side of things. And the organizational structure has changed. There's been some staffing issues, and certainly that's impacting your service delivery for sure. Complaint, I'm going to say complaint management is insufficient because really the other services are not being monitored. So in other words, requests that come to the community that don't necessarily become a formal complaint are not part of that complaint management process. So you really don't know what people are asking, and that is going to be, that's a key thing for municipalities to be able to build a good website and improve communications when you know what kinds of things people are asking questions about. Communication strategy, internal, external, is lacking. And again, I think that's linked to also your website is, I know, it's slated to be redone this year. And that it should include some online services and payments. A lot of time-consuming, paper-based processes, and this is really across the whole organization, public works, in and finance, payroll, etc. Work plans, again, are reactive. Recreation policies really need to be reviewed in terms of you've got some challenges around accounts receivable, health and safety issues. Financial planning and budget processes are still pretty well annual processes, and they haven't really implemented or integrated some modern approaches such as multi-year budgeting and having your departments more involved in the budget process. It's kind of unusual not to have your department heads present their own budgets in modern world. So financial reporting and forecasting, certainly you have the systems that can do it. It's just requiring some work to get them so that staff and management have access to financial reports on a regular basis and are undertaking their variance reporting. Performance measures really aren't part of that business plan and monitoring those performance measures. And in terms of the asset management regulation, these are required around levels of service. So this is really the time to get those established and start monitoring those in forms of things like dashboards. Your planning processes are quite time consuming. And when I say that's planning development processes are time consuming, and there's some opportunities there to streamline those. Your economic development strategy that was identified back in the previous strat plan really doesn't have any dedicated resources. It's kind of done off the side of the desk. And then finally, but not certainly not important, the community centers have a lot of management issues in terms of accounts receivable, as well as looking at utilization, and the possibilities are really endless there. So so you've got some great ability to make some change. So in terms of the systems, you have lots of systems. There's no strategy around them, and there's not any project management around how they're going to be implemented. You just purchased a new software for public works, but again, none of these are going to be successful without good project management, and they need to be integrated. So when we're looking at that, we should be looking at a holistic approach so that you can move to much more paperless processes. And of course, with our current situation, we all know that paperless would be great. So the more that we can get there, the better we can, and also implementing workflow within those processes. So quickly through and I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to have to try to be as efficient as possible. In terms of the individual services, really, the report will go into these individually, but there's our friends right there. So on the governance side of things, you are very much indicative of all of the benchmarks that we looked at. Some of your benchmarks actually have more counselors, so you're actually at the level that most municipalities are at. And as much as you'd love to increase voter turnout, you're actually higher than the average. So council, certainly in terms of your overall service profile, key areas around policy setting, strategic planning, and being community builders. So when we looked at the processes, we looked at your meetings, your decisions, and obviously we'll be doing some more of this work, but around policies and procedural bylaws. So key findings really reiterated visioning, procedural bylaws, looking at and strengthening those roles and relationships, and look at a new way of council training, including we would recommend around an orientation that has parliamentary procedures from an external party. So, and we've identified some key challenges. We'll send these to you. I've really highlighted them already, and the recommendations being, really to look to the long term and look at opportunities for future directions. And obviously, you have a mandate to get a new asset management plan by 2021. The CAO's office, of course, right now is a temporary position, and we're going to talk about this more when we do the organizational part of the review. It is a traditional position, but it is not mandated under the Municipal Act. The benchmarks that we looked at do have a CAO or a combined CAO position. So we'll look at that when we look at organizational structures. The clerk's department, who also handles planning, obviously a legislated position. The clerk does handle a variety of areas, including complaints management and records management. These are two areas where I think that the clerk's area needs to concentrate on. It was also surprising that the municipality doesn't do marriages, because actually that can be quite lucrative. And it's such a beautiful place. So that's a potential opportunity, and lots of municipalities have very active marriages. So council support, of course, or agenda preparation, I think really good. You're starting in on your eScribe, and that will just build. So that's a very good positive thing that's been undertaken. So lots of meetings. Of course, we'll talk about the procedural bylaw. Not a lot of, you actually don't do a significant amount of vital statistics. They're mostly passed on to you, so not a huge role. In terms of the complaints, again, these are only registered complaints, so most of them being in the property standards area, but buildings as well. So something to look at. Your current system really does not capture how long these take to resolve, just the basic information. So planning, of course, your planning coordinator and your official plan is through the county. Won't get into too much about that. You have a pretty steady planning application profile. So I think time is now to be looking at the planning processes. And so looking at ways to change that planning application process. None of the time that's spent on these planning applications individually are tracked. I would think that because they're based on fees, is an area to be looked at. As I mentioned, records management and agenda management. So in terms of, I'm just going to quickly go through here. In terms of finance, finance is obviously responsible for a variety of areas, including IT, financial management, asset management, and tax. They have the money. As I mentioned before, in terms of the financial reporting, processes are very paper-based, and we have non-integrated systems. A lot is resting on that role. There needs to be a more corporate approach. There's some challenges around systems, policies, services. Again, they all really relate to what we already talked about. And looking at a different way to do budgets, IT strategies, and sharing potentially with the county around payroll and online services and e-billing. Fire really is in a growing and changing, has been changing over time, so has done a lot of work in terms of moving the township forward. Probably the biggest area, I'm just going to quickly go past here, the biggest area in terms of findings is, number one, you're doing building permits manually, or burn permits, sorry. There are lots of easy, cheap solutions to do this online. They're bought off the shelf, and they actually will tell you where all the burns are on your mobile phone, and the fire service will know exactly where all the fires are at any time. So that's like a quick win. Certainly asset management and aging facilities around the fire service. There's a challenge around fire code compliance, and because of a volunteer service, and training is always a challenge. There's also an opportunity to get some revenue recovery around insurance. It could be done through a third party, or we've seen it done at county level as well. So again, some challenges around systems and policies. Your fire master plan is old. It probably is a time to look for the future as well. So really, that's a highlight of those opportunities. Building and bylaw, you've done some great stuff. You've got a new or a relatively new system. So of course you got your CBO and your bylaw enforcement. Some key things around building permit issuance. Of course, you've had technology advancements, but they're not integrated with your financial system yet. I know they're working on that. Bylaws are bylaw enforcement is pretty well reactive, reliant on complaints and customer service challenges. Probably the biggest challenge for the CBO was inheriting some open permits, so closing those off. We would recommend that you look at the fees and how they're applied to deposits to try to get people to come back and clean up their building permits as well. So again, alignment around that, allocating some financial resources to create some public education, and look at, perhaps you could look at expanding the building services with other municipalities and formalize that bylaw request approach online. Public works, which of course everybody thinks roads is the most important thing, because it is very important. Interestingly enough, our expert thinks your public works department has done a pretty good job. There's lots of challenges in terms of the gravel side of things, but in terms of how they manage their work is actually pretty good, other than the fact that it's very paper-based. They had lots of interest in moving forward in terms of work management. So I think they're on the right track. There's obviously some asset management challenges because of the aging infrastructure, but some really good things happening there. But there are some challenges in terms of the building and some health and safety challenges at the building. So currently the mesh implementation has got lots of, and that's really a work order management system, but I will tell you, I saw this product and it is fantastic. So I think the township did a great job in choosing this product. The challenge is that most of the people in public works have never used a computer or have very limited access to that. So again, opportunities around IT. And then finally, as I'm watching my time, so in terms of parks and recreation, lots of services being provided. Obviously, lots of user groups. I won't get into every one of those. And of course, you've got trails and play structures and all the normal things. The biggest challenge with recreation is around process and documented processes or lack thereof. Policies and procedures really do need to be updated, following a pay before you play kind of approach. Alcohol use, making sure that there's no challenges there. The part-time staff issue, in other words, people being part-time and then ending their service is having a challenge with the service, because you don't have the trained staff there that understand ice technicians. So that's an area to be concerned about, and as well the integration or lack thereof of the financial system. The utilization is low, so we did do a very preliminary look. The utilization could definitely be increased. And as I mentioned, also advertising revenues could definitely be increased at those two facilities. Knowledge and comfort, of course, around IT, a new system that was put in a few years ago now is really being underutilized. Most municipalities that are using the product you have, booking, people can log on and actually book their own time. All of your processes are done by the staff. User fees in particular, I know that you're looking at your user fees in a couple of weeks. I would highly recommend that the user fees be assessed in terms of the cost recovery as much as possible, and a fee study be done in the next year. And track the utilization. It was interesting when we asked for utilization, it was very difficult to get it. So that is a key management performance measure around and as well complaints and facility management, and obviously tracking and managing the accounts receivable, which is a significant problem at the arenas. So in terms, I know that's a lot to take in a very short period of time. So in terms of the next steps, we are going to finalize the service inventories. We are still waiting on some data and looking at processes in much more detail, and particularly areas where we think that if you had looked at some of the opportunities, how those processes could eliminate non-value added activities. And we will be doing additional data analysis. We have started that, still gathering some of the data and identifying the wastes in process, really those non-value added steps, and how we can improve or reduce your lead time, the amount of time that you're spending on these processes. And then of course we've developed some opportunities, but we have not costed them nor identified the benefits yet, because we really want to be able to do that with the process mapping is going to tell us how much would be the savings from these opportunities. And then of course, develop your roadmap and your recommendations. So really what we're trying to say is one time is best. Enter one thing, one time, one place. Make sure you have policies and procedures in place that everybody understands, including the public, that you've got an IT strategy that's based on integrated document management, no paper, customer relationship managers, so customers can go to you and pay all of their service online. And of course, there's always change management required in any of these types of service reviews. So that is very fast, and I'm open to questions.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. And that was a lot of material to get through. I do appreciate that. And we will open it up. We have about 13 minutes or so, and then we're going to end this session and go to our council meeting. But first of all, with today's new reality and the COVID-19 situation and all these things that we're now facing and the unknown, is that becoming a part of this report as well?
Definitely. I think I don't think that there's anything that we're sort of identified in the opportunities that wouldn't better support that. All of the ability to have access to information wherever you are in the world is really where you want to be. You want to have it so that it's in one place, and flexibility. So, being able to be mobile and definitely is a plus for sure. So yes, definitely we'll address those things.
And we will, at the end of all this, get some solid recommendations that will be very clear to understand.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Okay, questions for anyone? Put your hand up, please. We have a couple of minutes. Good information. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, just real quickly, and I very much appreciate this. It is a lot to take in, and it's a lot of work you've done already, and we really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. One of the things with the IT, the IT part getting online, there is, and we have an aging population here in the township. There's a lot of people that don't have a computer, don't have a smartphone. They want to come in and pay their taxes at the front desk. They want to do everything manually still. I mean, we're still going to have a challenge with that for a few years to come yet. Just an observation. It's nothing, no major complaint or anything like that. It's just, that's the way our township is with a lot of senior people still.
Yep. Yes, and so one of the things that we've, and I live in the country as well, so all my neighbors are in the same boat, and my father. But so one of the things that we've done in other places is sort of, it's a transitional thing. So we want to put things that are in transition, and also you want to make them as simple as possible. You want to be able to have a few clicks that you can do. I know even paying for your taxes on your bank site, people have been confused because you have 2 or 3 or 4 different account numbers with the same municipality. You've got to try to make it simple. And that's what Lean Six Sigma is all about, is look at it from the customer and walk it through as a customer. So some municipalities too have had kiosks at their front counter, so that when people are learning, that they can walk them through. So they still do the transaction electronically, but they are giving them, sort of training them at the same time. And I realize that in the COVID situation, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but hopefully we'll be able to put some, some barriers, etc., that we can handle that. But I think that's the way a lot of organizations have handled that, those, different generations.
Good, thank you.
Carl, go ahead.
Thank you, Tammy, for all your work. Yeah, thank your team as well as yourself. Very detailed, and looking forward to going through the whole presentation in more detail. So thanks, great start.
Time is moving on. Heather, you go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Ms. Carruthers, thank you very much for your time and detail and attention. Like my colleagues, I look forward to having an opportunity to look at it in a more deep dive kind of way. Picking up a comment from Councillor Watt around the technology, I'm more concerned about the adaptation of technology among our staff. So it's kind of a two-part question. First, when you're talking about public works, being able to use mobile technology more, as well as building department, recognizing that there are definitely some coverage issues with respect to mobile access to mobile signals and what have you. So I think that there are some limitations there within our area specifically that make it difficult. But also in terms of training and the staff review that I believe you said is forthcoming. So will your staffing review include an analysis of the skill gap around technology and technology use, and when can we see that coming?
Yeah, so I think that's a two-part question. So first and foremost, yes, you're absolutely right. This is a change management dilemma for most municipalities. And we will, as we mentioned before, we will include a change management strategy that will identify, yes, there are certain areas that, and certain people perhaps that have more challenges. And so the thing is, we're going to give you some tools around how to do a change management strategy. And that's not just, that's not a top down, it's understanding each person's individual skill set. The question you had around the mobile, most of these products that even that the one that you bought has an ability to be offline. So in other words, you're still doing your work, and then once you come in to the office or into an area that does have mobile, then you can download them. There's actually, back in 1992 when we did this at the Ministry of Labor, there was no there was no cell service anywhere, and it was all done when you got into the office, and it just would download. So of course, now that we've got some better technology, there's still that ability. So there's, I don't think that that's an issue, and certainly we know that Eastern Ontario suffers from outages and areas, but that's definitely overcomable. I think the people side thing is more challenging actually than the technology.
And just a note, of course, our URN project that is now going out for tender, hopefully is going to erase a lot of that problem with
Yes.
mobile coverage. Okay, I am going to wrap it up now. This was just a very preliminary report, and Tammy, it's very detailed, and I can't thank you and your staff enough.
Very
It was
good.
great.
Thank you.
We do look forward to more detail and to solid recommendations. And I would like a motion to receive that presentation, please. Tom and Sheila, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, that motion is approved, and I thank you. Okay, one more item. I'm going to turn it to Martina about the project update, and then we will adjourn and we will get on with our regular council meeting. Martina, go ahead.
Yep. So in your package, you'll find attached our service delivery review project update from March and April, and it goes through the various tasks that Tammy has identified and their completion and deadline. So that's just for council's information. As they get updated, I send them to council, so you're aware of the project timelines.
Good, excellent. Okay, a motion to receive that report, please. Mr. Moher and Heather will be the seconder. All in favor? All opposed? Motion is approved. Okay, thank you all very much. Tammy,
Thank you very much.
you're always welcome to come back.
Thank you so much.
I would like a
Yeah,
motion,
sure.
please, to adjourn the meeting. Sheila and Carl, all in favor? Motion, is anybody against that motion? Good, that motion's approved. Okay, we are adjourned. We will be signing off here on Zoom